Recording in progress.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, telos ng sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinihinang, tuyag ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nanagang tutok sa simoy at sa langit ng pagaw, ay hinatang tula, kawin sa pagkayang minamahal. katawan mo'y tagumpay na nag-iiging. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang may matitiging. Luman ang araw ng walhagin pansin ka, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya na pagkay mga aking, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Let us begin by putting ourselves in the presence of the Almighty God. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, Creator of the heavens and the earth and everything in it, we glorify your name, for you are good and loving. You have given us these magnificent creations we enjoy daily. Lord, we praise and thank you for the blessings you have showered upon us. You are the source of all knowledge and truth, and we seek you, asking for your guidance and protection as you blessed us with this opportunity to gather virtually. Despite the challenges each one of us face, help us learn together so we could grow together in wisdom and understanding. Give us the thirst to pursue knowledge and the humility to acknowledge that our wisdom is incomparable to yours. Help us value each other's opinion, lead us to inspiring discussions, help us appreciate one another's work. Open our hearts and our minds to receive new things. Bless our speakers and facilitators with courage and determination to share to us what you have placed in their hearts so that they can impart to us something worthwhile. Bless all the participants with patience and endeavor to persevere. May we become worthy to receive what we will learn today. Let this event be a success, and at the end of the day, may all of us accomplish something meaningful. Thank you, Father God, for the responsibility and the privilege to learn. Kanimo lamang kami moduol kay balumi nga ang among mga paghangyo imong pagadungdong. Please bless the efforts of our hands. We lift everything to you, O Lord. Salamat sa imong pagkamaayo, Ginoo. This we pray in your holy name. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Any response from our participants?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Once again, a pleasant afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As we open this program, allow me to read a few gentle reminders. Number one, kindly mute your microphones. Please check whether your microphone icon in your monitor is muted. Number two, pin the speaker during his talk. Number three, ask questions only during the open forum and not while the speaker is talking. Number 4, you may write your questions and reactions in the chat box. Number 5, you may open your cameras, and if your camera is open, keep body movements minimal. This is the last webinar for this series on diversity in education. As a quick recap, previously we talked about first, diversity and teacher education, which underscores the importance of diversity as one of the integral courses of the teacher education curriculum. And secondly, multilingualism in education, which informs teachers that language used by learners at home may influence learning. Today, we will be exploring another interesting topic or issue. So ladies and gentlemen, to give us an in-depth look at the diversity approaches in education, please help me welcome our resource speaker from KU Leuven University, and University of Amsterdam, Professor Dr. Orhan Agirdag. Your warm applause, please.
Thank you everyone for again having me, and thank you for attending to this session. If there are questions, you can pose them on the chats and we can address them at the end. Hopefully that we can have a interesting discussion like we had in the last time. I'm just first will start by sharing my slides, which will take just 1 minute. Let me see. Here's the share screen, share sounds. If everything worked well, my screen slides are now visible at yours.
Yes, Professor Orhan.
Okay, so I can start. So today I would like to talk more about how diversity is approached within schools and how this in general affects learning, which is of course related to the two previous sessions that we had. Before I start, it might be interesting again to see when I'm talking about diversity, again to briefly recap that I talk about very cultural differences between groups of peoples. So this can be between cultural regarding the social class, rich or poor, between regional differences, rural, urban, ethnic differences between minorities and majorities that could refer to religion, to mother tongue, to racial appearance, national origin, but to a certain level, gender differences, and that I'm focusing much more on cultural elements within this diversity. This is just a brief recap of what I've talked in the first session. And interestingly, the issue of diversity is, as we have also talked previously, related to several challenges that are actually increasing each other, that are actually working on each other throughout different mechanisms. Like we have the question of inequalities that among different peoples that are steered by segregation, that are steered by different stereotypes in education, prejudice, less expectations, issues of discrimination and racism. And while this might all enforce the achievement inequalities that we see in education. And as there is the research in many countries point out that issues such as discrimination are highly prevalent among schools. For instance, this is from a study in Belgian secondary schools where we have measured that 68% of pupils of boys of color and 59% of girls of color have once or more experienced discrimination by their teachers, which is kind of amazing if you ask the general population in this regard as well, because these are quite high numbers. Looking at I'm going to restart my screen because there's like a drawing on the screen which distracts me a lot. Excuse me for a second. So when we look at these experiences by pupils, we see this reality of discrimination and very much experience. But also this results, among others, to inequalities between different groups in education. This is something we have previously talked about, but I can repeat it, that if you look at this famous PISA results of the international studies that has been conducted, we see in many countries the inequalities between different groups. This is the case for Belgium, this is the case for Germany, this is the case for the UK, this is the case for many countries, that there are inequalities between groups in education. And this is also the case for the Philippines, where there is this, for instance, the socioeconomic differences between students of groups, where socioeconomically advantaged groups, through which students outperform same-year-old poor students with 88 score points, which corresponds to almost 2 years of disadvantage for poor students in the Philippines. And also in terms of immigration background, there is differences that we can see in many PISA countries, also in the Philippines, in Belgium, and other countries. And this level are similar level of inequalities in Belgium as well. So you see that in many countries there is these inequalities between different type of groups of students. However, we have also said that these inequalities are not some type of nature law, that we can do something about it, and that in some schools and in some classrooms there are less inequalities. And we have seen that high cultural sensitivity among teachers and less prejudice among teachers and high academic expectation among teachers will result in less inequalities in higher achievement levels. And I've already briefly talked about this. But what I will talk today about are the two different factors that avoiding a deficit or assimilationist or colorblind school policy or class practices also results in less inequalities and higher achievement, and that a multiculturalist or interculturalist school policy can increase the level of achievement level and decrease inequalities in schools. So today I will focus on these two elements, on how we deal in schools in terms of policy or in terms of practices within classrooms, shape the chances of equal opportunities among pupils. In order to understand that well, I think that we need to understand two main questions that we have to deal with when we are confronted with diversity, cultural diversity in specific. The first question relates to our vision about diversity. What do we think about diversity? And there are three possible answers for that, which results in three different types of policies or practices regarding diversity, namely, how do we deal with diversity? What are these three possibilities that we can think about diversity and deal with diversity? The first option is that we regard diversity as a deficit, as something that comes along with deficits among peoples, let us say cultural deficit, linguistic deficit, genetic deficits, or whatever type of deficits, alleged deficits that students might potentially have. And when we regard diversity from a deficit perspective, then the result is mostly related to assimilationist policies, namely to decrease this diversity that results in deficits, for instance, linguistic deficits, etc. So deficit perspective, deficit vision in education results mostly in assimilationist school practices. I will further give examples of what these assimilation school policies might be and what the consequences are for the academic qualities. A second option of vision on diversity, on what do we think about cultural diversity, is to not regard it as a deficit, as something that is not good, but something that has been neutral, something that we are actually just having diversity and not dealing with it at all, not giving any attention to it, just ignoring it because it's not important to education, one might say. This type of vision results in what has been called in the literature as being a colorblind or diversity blind perspective. That is, one can see differences, but just ignores it or just calls them as unimportant for learning. This is another way of policy to deal with diversity, just claiming to ignoring it, just to be colorblind to the differences in education. That is a second perspective, potential perspective in how diversity is approached in schools. I will give further examples of what colorblind perspective in education might mean for learning and achievement. A third perspective on approach on diversity is the vision of diversity as an asset, as something that can help learning, as something that has been a positive for learning. So not regarded as a deficit, not regarded as something natural, but something as a valuable that can increase the achievement levels. And this might be translated in a policy that has been dubbed as multiculturalism or interculturalism or pluralism in schools. So the main story here is that there are three different approaches that are related to three different visions. What do we think about diversity, which then translate in policy in how do we deal with diversity. Let me now focus in the three different elements and their implications for achievement, their implications for quality in education. First, to start with deficit. What does a deficit perspective or an assimilationist perspective in schools mean, and what are the academic results of a deficit perspective, of an assimilationist perspective? A deficit model regards cultural diversity as a source of a deficiency, that when there is this diversity, some students are deficient. This deficiency, alleged deficiency, can be alleged on the intelligence, on languages, on norms, on values. And so the requirement of assimilation comes above as a requirement for success. So all students have to share the same language, same religion, same values in order to be success in this deficit perspective. And this is related to a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, that we think that intelligences, for instance, are fixed, that you cannot change it. So it results in a fixed perspective on intelligence. And I've already showed some examples of a potential deficit assimilations perspective regarding language during my last course when it comes about linguistic diversity. We have seen that, for instance, in Belgium, and likewise in many countries, many teachers regard linguistic differences as a deficit, that many people are not allowed to speak their mother tongue at school, and that the school library almost very few times includes books in different languages. And while sometimes pupils are even punished for speaking their mother tongue at school, and that this is a common practice in many schools. I'm going very quickly about it because I've already talked very broadly during my last presentation on this topic. But there is not only perspective on deficits and assimilation when it comes to language only, but when we see on how religion and religious diversity is regarded, we see again a tendency in many European countries towards more assimilationist perspective. One famous example of this in Europe is the ban to wearing on the headscarf in many universities in many countries. Most importantly, France. French are very negative when it comes to religious differences, and one tends to avoid the religion and religious diversity in order to propagate the so-called neutral schools or universities. And this is also case in some Belgian campuses. Most Belgian universities would allow religious differences. I'm actually working in a Catholic university, so it would be strange to not allow religion in my university. But there are some colleges who tend to be very negative about religious differences. And in France, this can be sometimes ridiculously imposed on children. For instance, this was a news outlet that a Muslim girl was sent home in school because she was wearing not only the hijab, but the long skirt. So this could be regarded as a deficit, as something that had to be outside in schools. However, when scientific and scholarly research examine these types of policies, we see their negative effects. For instance, this very interesting study published in American Political Science Review have have examined the ban on wearing the headscarf in France, what it did with the academic achievement and academic attainment of French Muslim women. And the results of this study clearly show that they say we find that the law reduces the secondary education attainment of Muslim girls and impacts their trajectory in the labor market and family composition in the long run. We provide evidence that the ban operates through increased perception of discrimination. So assimilationist policies are mostly regarded as discriminative, and it affects the achievement levels of students in a negative way. So it is something that schools, teachers tends to be avoid. One of the reasons why these type of deficit perspectives are related to more inequalities and less achievement is because it's related to a fixed mindset, a mindset where teachers or professors think that the abilities of the students are fixed and not being able to grow. And most of the times, this results that underrepresented racial minorities perform worse when they are taught by professors and teachers who have a fixed mindset, and contrary when they are taught by a professor or teacher who have a growth mindset, who believe that students can evolve in their capacities. This seems to result in an increased opportunity for learning and less inequality between groups. That's a summary of the first approach on diversity, namely a deficit vision and a assimilationist policy. But that is not the only approach in education. I have argued that there are two other perspectives or approaches as well. One of these approaches is the neutrality or the colorblindness approach that regards diversity not as a deficit, but something as neutral or unimportant. So one argue for a colorblind perspective on diversity. Some of the I call this a bingo because you hear a lot of this type of colorblind stances from teachers across schools. And you might call this bingo when you recognize some of these colorblind stances, such as, it does not matter whether peoples are brown, black, green, or white, I don't see their color. Or we don't think in ethnic terms in our schools. Or children do not discriminate. Or there is no diversity in schools, in our schools. So these are very much these tenses that are pronounced that by colorblind perspectives on diversity. However, colorblindness is a myth, is an urban legend, is just not corresponding to the nature or to the results of research that we find that people tend to see each other racial appearances like people see each other's gender appearances in a very early years of time. And this started with the American experiments with children, with many children of color, who have been shown to be able to see, not only see different racial differences between different groups, but also internalize the internalize racial stereotypes that exist about different groups, also about their own group. So let me show you a brief experiment that shows how children, namely children of color, are aware of racial differences and aware of an internalized racial stereotypes. It takes like about 1 minute, this video clip.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and she has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me?
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
Okay.
That doll.
So in this experiment, originally conducted by Clark and Clark in the 1950s in the United States, it has been shown that children already at the age of 4 not only seeing each other racial background but they also tends to think in racial stereotypes even when the stereotypes are biased against their own groups. So you see that a black child actually internalized very much of this racial stereotype, racist stereotypes about about themselves. So going back to the idea of colorblindness, you see that this is an illusion to think that children do not see a color of each other, or even adults who should not see
Which doll?
colors. We see each other's colors, but the idea of paying no attention to the differences just increases these stereotypes, just increases these prejudices. For instance, in this experimental research on different types of class, in the colorblind condition, one saw that the belonging, the sense of well-being, sense of belonging of a person of color was much lower than the majority group, in this case, white students. So colorblind types of classrooms where the teacher says that is not important where you come from. tends to be doing well for the majority students, but not for the minority students. And in my own research in Belgium and primary schools, I found that the majority groups perform in each of the cases in colorblind classes and in high colorblind classes at the same level, while the minorities, in this case is ethnic Turkish pupils, performed lower in classrooms that had a high level of colorblindness, that where teachers reported that for them diversity is neutral, that they pay no attention to diversity. So paying no attention to diversity does not affect the achievement or level of the majority, but does negatively affect the achievement level of minority students. And also in this study that is being performed in a higher education context, it is seen that diversity statements that many universities have also an impact on different racial and gender groups. The researchers experimented with two types of welcoming messages. And the one case, they received a colorblind message where it said that it is not important which racial, ethnic, or gender or religious background that you come from, that everybody is just equal, inclusive. While in the multicultural sense, they said that it is very important that the diversity creates a more unified, exciting, and collaborative environment. And the researchers have tested what these differences do with the achievement level of students. And they found that participants expected more bias and less race and gender diversity after exposure to a colorblind versus a multicultural message. The colorblind message was particularly damaging for women of color, prompting them to expect the least diversity overall and to perform worse, as well as to actually perform worse on math tests than the multicultural message. So you see that the well-meaning colorblindness messages can be harming, and particularly for those who are most at risk. One of the reasons why colorblindness harms achievement is because it's related to less detection of discrimination. In this experiment, two different types of students are set in two different groups. In one condition, students received a colorblind message where they said that it was not important that their racial background, their cultural background was not important. In the other group, one said it is very important where you come from. Diversity makes or more enriching. So, and the results point that exposure to a colorblind mindset was related to less detection of racial discrimination. So once you are exposed to the colorblindness mindset or colorblind idea, it seems that you are less able to detect and to go against racial discrimination. This results that the discrimination is much more having a much worse impact in a colorblind setting than it does in a value diversity setting. And that is why it's important to not neglect a diversity, but to embrace it and rather celebrate it. And in this study that we have conducted in the Netherlands, in the University of Amsterdam, we saw that in higher education, this type of cultural diversity also has a similar impact. That diversity, when professors and lecturers are regarded as colorblind, that cultural misunderstandings increase, which harms the feeling of psychological safety for many students. While in multicultural classrooms, this was not the case. When lectures were perceived to communicate colorblind approach, cultural misunderstandings and their negative effects remained high. A third way of dealing with differences is that to regard diversity as an asset, as something valuable, as something that brings positive things at the long run. At least, I've spoken about for instance, the benefits of bilingualism for the brain, for the economics, but cultural differences also come with economical and development and other aspects of assets. So multiculturalism regards differences as positive and tries to implement it in the core of the curriculum, in the core of the lessons, try to approach it in a diversity embracing, diversity valuing manner. And one of the important reasons to do that is a diverse campus, for instance, universities, and a diverse faculty in universities is clearly related to more achievement level for almost all students. For instance, in this study, one found that overall graduation rates of underrepresented racial minority students of all races and ethnicities were positively affected by more a diverse faculty, by more diverse professors in that universities. And in this study, again in the United States, the results point out that the diverse faculty enhances student success, ultimately providing them with improving their grades and retention levels. And given the benefits to students, a focus on the hiring and retention of faculty of color might be the key in addressing academic disparities. So having a faculty, having professors and lecturers and teachers that come from diverse backgrounds might be crucial. But that might not be enough if there's not also a curricular focus on diversity in schools. And this is, for instance, an important research that examined the causal effects of cultural relevance and what, for instance, having ethnic studies in the curriculum brings to the general achievement level of students. And this experimental research found that when students were assigned to a course where they have learned about cultural diversity, so where the cultural relevant pedagogies are implemented as a course, this increased the ninth grade attendance by 21% and their GPA by 1.4 grades and credits earned by 23. This surprisingly large effect suggests that cultural relevant pedagogy, when implemented in a high fidelity context, can provide effective support to at-risk students. So just providing a course on cultural diversity increases the general performance achievement of students at risks. So it also decreases inequalities. So we don't need only diverse teachers, we also need a diverse curriculum. And having a course in schools, in primary schools or secondary schools, where diversity is taught to the students increases their GPA, increases their performances levels. And in this study by my Belgian colleagues in Belgium, the researchers also have found why this is the case. Why does assimilationism and colorblindness harm students while multiculturalism increases their chances? And they looked at the impact of school policies. For instance, do schools pay at the policy level attention to diversity? Do they regard it as a positive thing, or do they just forbid it or ignore it? And they found that this is mediated through senses of school belonging, that students tend to feel less belonging to a school when diversity is neglected or just excluded, while they feel more belonging when the diversity is approached throughout the curriculum as a positive element. And so this study predicts that multiculturalism predicts smaller belonging and achievement gaps, so more belonging and more achievement over time. And colorblindness and assimilation were related to wider achievement and belonging gaps, respectively. Longitudinal effects of colorblindness and achievement were mediated by less prior school belonging. So because of colorblindness reduces the belonging of students, it tends to have an impact on their achievement level. And also in my own research, I found that this level of multiculturalist, pluralist class practices, where the different religions, different languages, different cultures are celebrated within the classroom, are seen as something relevant to teaching, are used by teachers to explain things, then we see that the inequality levels reduces greatly between the majority and the minority group. And also this study that have examined the differences of different types of policies across universities have found similar results. That universities where there is a multicultural policies, that the difference between different racial groups are smaller, while universities that tend to have a colorblind perspective, the achievement levels are larger, even larger than the control condition where one does simply do nothing. So a colorblind perspective might, again, as this study shows, reduces the achievement gaps between different, a multicultural perspective might reduce achievement gap between different ethnic and racial groups in education. I've been went rather quick on the different approaches. Of course, it is now important for future teachers and future professionals to know what can be done in practice to avoid the different to avoid the assimilation's perspective and to avoid colorblindness and to valorize different cultural elements. And how to do it, there are different aspects which can be done. One starting point is, for instance, work by scholars such as James Banks, who provides 5 different ways or dimensions of cultural diversity and 4 different approaches on how this diversity could be implemented in schools. I think it is very important to look at this from context to context. What can be done in Belgian context might be probably different than the Philippine context, where the diversity represents itself in different religions and different cultural backgrounds and different. For instance, we don't have indigenous people issue in Belgium. So in that regard, there can be not done so much in schools. While of course in the Philippines, the IPs are a very important group and having a large sets and also very important rights in education. So it depends very much on the contextual differences, on this how cultural, linguistic, religious differences can be made a part of the curriculum and can be regarded in that way. Not only to celebrate the differences, which can be very important, I think, but importantly to increase the quality of learning, to increase the engagement and belonging of students, so that that everybody can feel at home at schools, so the learning can be excellent. So this was very briefly my presentation. I think that there might be some questions that I can answer now in this regard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orhan or Professor Orhan, for a very insightful presentation of on the topic diversity or approaches on the topic which involves diversity approaches in school. So to facilitate the Q&A, and later she will also give us a discussion about the final evaluation of the CPD. Please help me welcome the Dean of the College of Education, Professor Dr. Amelia Tibuan. A round of applause, please.
Okay. I have a difficulty of unmuting myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Orhan, for that very detailed discussion on diversity. Actually, if you remember, for those who are present here on our first session, second session, and third session, Dr. Orhan really drilled in on the concept of this diversity inside the classroom and how it affects learning. If you remember, during our first session, Professor Orhan discussed well on challenge the TI on the role of teacher education on preparing teachers, and on inclusivity of instruction, and as well as promote equity in the classroom, and also challenge all our school teachers who are here in our webinar. We challenge us to think about our policy, school policy, to avoid conflict and inequality in our classroom. And the last session, we discussed about linguistic diversity. And we are all challenged on how we implement of our K-3 classroom on our mother tongue and MTB and MLE in our discussion last time. And today we have seen a detailed discussion on how research also support on that. Actually, I'm so sad with the video when students, when those participants have to choose the color. So that's why in the research, it was emphasized that the color blindness will how it affects the performance of the students. And also it was emphasized on the it was emphasized on the diversity of students and faculty promote more achievement. It promotes achievement in the classroom. So I guess our participants here have a lot of questions, with Professor Orhan, and I'm so glad that Professor Orhan really comprehensively discussed those important discussions. And I'm very sure you have questions for Professor Orhan. Anyone? Anyone who will start?
So,
okay, I guess, Jay, do you have a question?
To start the discussion, I would like to ask a question to Professor Orhan. Professor Orhan mentioned about the punishment. Sometimes children are punished for speaking a different language in the classroom. And although this question might be quite sensitive because it may hold on the idea of maybe violence, but I'm just interested, what forms of punishment are made for students who speak different language in the classroom, in the European context?
Yeah, it depends very much on the country, and it depends very much on the school, what type of sanctions that there are given to students. It most of the times it's kind of like a suspension to write things like, just write a one page. I will speak Dutch all the time, or but in some cases also less pedagogically interesting sanctions, such as cleaning the playground or things like that. And teachers tend to work most of the time with tally marks. You know, when you got three traps that you are then, but it's in many cases it sends the wrong signal. But I'm also happy to inform you on that in Belgium at least this practice is I'm not saying disappearing, but is decreasing. So it's so our research to make aware teachers that this is might be not the best practice, it works. So we see that over the years the number of children who are punished for speaking their mother tongue decreases, and so there is also this positive news, and it tends to be more pronounced in my specific country, Belgium, due to historical reasons. The country had to fight a lot for its independence and to establish especially the minority language of Dutch against the important large language of French that has been spoken. So it had to protect the Dutch language. One of the reasons why this is so protected and people is this history of protection that explains why it's in this context very much outspoken. You have that experience in Germany as well, but not that much as in Flanders, Belgium. And it is and in English speaking countries such as the UK, it does not exist because I think that English speaking countries are not threatened anyway in their languages. They feel English is so dominant. This is the language we're speaking now. That in those in schools in the England, or we don't see this practice of punishment. It is more in continental Europe, countries such as Belgium, Germany, to a certain level, France, that with high number of minorities who speak another language that might happen. So it depends on the school, depends on the countries, and it's a practice that has been decreasing. Still, it's a practice that harms. It's a deficit way of thinking about differences. So minority languages regarded as that not something that brings an asset, but brings a deficit, and that's the basic reason why it's harmful on children. Like it's also harmful to exclude religious differences. I'm actually one of the nice surprises during these presentations for me was the starting with not only the anthem but also the prayings, which I think it's very positive. So that was my learning experience. One of the during these sessions that I can maybe bring into my own country. Even if I work in a Catholic university, there is almost no mentioning at all of religion differences. We are very secularized in this sense, and one of the results of these type of policies is that students who are religious feel excluded, mostly from the universities. So I think I'm bringing from these sessions a good practice that you can start with why we wouldn't start with a prayer that is so inclusive that can speak to all students in terms of their. So these type of practices I think are more inclusive, brings the diversity in, while excluding, for instance, a student because she's wearing a cross or a hijab is I think the exclusive way and to that not promotes achievement levels.
Thank you very much, Professor Orhan. Actually, in our experience, most of the teachers or policy makers maybe are here and teens are here. With that punishment, I remember before when maybe I'm an elementary student, we are punished when we talk our own language, and if we have to practice speaking in English. And if we speak in our language, we have to pay 1 peso per word. Okay, I know some of us have that experience. And right now in the elementary, because we have improvement on our school policy, it's because right now we are maximizing the use of the use of our own language in our locality. And I hope teachers know what are the different language the students are talking, and as well as the religion in the school. This is really the format, or maybe even in the classroom, when we start our day, we will start with a prayer. But I'm not so sure, because when I observe one of my students in our teaching demonstration, our pre-service student, I visited her in the school. She started with a prayer, but the prayer is not inclusive. It's for Christians. And then I found out that there are 3 students inside the class who are Muslims. So I'm thinking that the one that you have shared ago, even on starting the class, if you establish some routines in the class, it must be inclusive. Even though prayer is just 2 minutes of the time, we should think about that it should be for all type of learners that we have. Yeah, thank you for that question, Jay and Dr. Orhan. And I'm very sure many are opening the camera, and I'm very sure if they raise their hand, the technical team will give them mic rights. Yeah, Angeline Dinoro is raising her hand. You may now give your question.
Thank you, Dean Ami. Good afternoon, Professor Dr. Orhan. I have learned in the presentation, especially on the studies conducted that you have presented, they support that embracing multiculturalism has indeed it gives impact, desirable effects in teaching learning. Now, I am very interested to know, how are the faculty members being prepared? How are they helped or prepared to effectively not only advocate, but practice multiculturalism in classrooms? How are they prepared, and how are they helped, the faculty members? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting questions. I had briefly talked about that during also the first presentation that I've given on teacher preparation, and this depends very much on the context, country, and even region that we see. For instance, if you look at the Tally study, that's an international survey of teachers in many countries, that while in countries such as the United States or the UK, a lot of faculty and a lot of teachers, both in primary, secondary, and in higher education, feel quite well prepared. About 50% or so say that they are quite well prepared. This decreases up to 15% and 10% in France and Belgium and the Netherlands. So it is very country specific. And within the countries, there's also this large differences between, for instance, the teacher education programs. That some programs seems to be more effective in preparing teachers because they also have the faculty that is prepared to do that for the futures. And three key elements for that, for preparing future teachers, but also faculty to diversity, is first establish a well-found and evidence-informed vision on diversity. Secondly, to have your curriculum set up that there are not only courses on these elements throughout the different curriculum, but also what might call be infusion of diversity throughout the whole curriculum, not only in specific courses, but in general courses. And third element, that the campus itself, both in terms of faculty and in terms of students is diverse. When you have these elements, the preparation and vision becomes better. While when these are lacking, like in many countries or like in many teacher education programs, then you might have a problem of not preparing well. So it's possible, but not happening everywhere at the same level.
Thank you, Professor Orhan. Ma'am Angie Dinoro. So, are you okay with the reply of Dr. Orhan, right? Okay, thank you very much, Ma'am Angie. And yeah, actually every session, Professor Orhan really challenged us. And one thing that the capacity building, and I guess we are starting now for our region 10, we should think about this 3 sessions and also think about on how do we include the diversity across the curriculum. So in that way, maybe if we capacitate our pre-service teachers, and for those who are training, our pre-service teachers are us, the faculty of the teacher education institution. We must be very sensitive on this topic, on how do we promote multiculturalism in our policy, in our institute policy, and as well as how do we infuse this topic in not only a certain topic in our curriculum, but it may be embedded in all our curriculum. That's why I'm calling my friends here, our teaching education institution leaders, that maybe we would have time to talk about this and look at our curriculum and in what way could we include this and in most of our, maybe in our major curriculum, in our pedagogy courses, that we could really prepare our future teachers on this. Because that's one example. When I have my observation with my pre-service teachers, I am surprised with that oh, I thought I have prepared them, but this happened in the classroom. So therefore, maybe I still need more to improve my content and how I also model it with them. And with that, Professor Orhan.
I think that there are also interesting questions in the chat.
The chat, yeah.
I see one of the questions here of Naima, who asks, what school activities which suggest to boost children's understanding and appreciation of race and religion? Well, I think it might be important to not directly think in terms of activities, but rather in terms of lessons, core lessons. So when we are selecting good material for these lessons, and it can be throughout all lessons. And for instance, when we are learning about a language, main language or a foreign language, you do that with texts. Formal that you select. The contents of this text could be, for instance, about cultural differences, and this might be a way of implemented in the not as an extra, because many teachers are already having a lot of things to do, but diversifying their core contents that they are already using. And so when you are teaching math, you can use examples of societal questions to calculate things that have cultural relevance. For instance, calculating the level of poverty, the level of inequality, to learn how to do the math, of course. And while the examples can be very societally relevant, that can be regarded on different racial or religious or cultural importance. Of course, it is also much more easier to, for instance, the course of history, to regard on how historical cultural things are established. That is, I think, easy to do. But I think the challenge is to do it in all other common courses such as language, mathematics, geography, and not only think it as an extra activities that a school has to do. Yes, that there can be made place for extra activities, but if you only do extra activities, such as, what is very common in some schools in Europe are diversity days, then you actually give the message that diversity is something extraordinary. While when you have it in your core courses, when you have it in your core elements of in all teaching elements, some focus on diversity, it helps to normalize diversity. It helps to see it as an asset that's always there. So it's especially a challenge, I believe, to include in the selection of learning materials that have enough focus on that establish the value of multilingualism, that establish the potential value of religious differences. That is in that case that can be done, and not so much only as an extra activities. Yes, extra activities are welcome, but it's more important to have it in your core. I hope that this is attentive goes into direction.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Orhan. But for sure, for those in-service teachers who are here, this session is very important to us, and that's a very good suggestion that it should not be additional work that we were going to do, but it should be embedded on what we are doing. But I guess, Professor Orhan, we have some level of accepting change, right? So maybe right now we get to know it, and with the ideas that we have that we're sharing right now, all the teachers may be here, the educators who are here, and as well as pre-service who are here, maybe they're thinking about on how do I do this in my classroom? And then there's a question also from here, from YouTube, YouTube Live, from Harvijan Kalisagan. How do we practice diversity in school if the administration do not value the idea of it? That's her question. Because as with this, maybe this is a change or an improvement. So there's a level of implementing it. So, but this is a very good question, right? So how do we manage this?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think that in order to answer that, it might be important to look as teachers to certain level of alliance with other teachers first. And you can start with just by reading an article and a text, with like inviting your colleagues with a drink to let's read something. Let's see whether we can do something about it. So to start informally, but let's say just spend 1 hour in a week with your colleagues in order to read things on that material, and to not just to follow what research says. That is not what I'm suggesting. To critically read and to see, can we do something about it? Oh, here's a writing of a professor who said that giving religious examples in the classroom might help. What do we think about it? What do you think about it? So when teachers form alliances within a school, then the administration of school is much more inclined to go with than with where you as an individual teacher try to bring change. It is very hard to bring as an individual change in a context that is not so much inclined or that not sees that as a priority. So then you will feel excluded or as isolated as a teacher in a context that is not being supported. While when you form alliances, friendships with other colleagues, just start with one, then try to go larger, where you have reading groups. No administration will, I think, be against reading groups. That where you read scientific and scholarly work on this issue, and where you see how we can implement it. that I think might be a way to incrementally change the context. It is very hard to change the context as an individual, and it might harm your feelings when you see that you have good feelings, you try to, and you are worked against by maybe even not only administration but by parents. It's also a possibility. To avoid that, it might be interesting to build from bottom up alliances with different teachers and to use the scientific literature, scholarly literature on this as a starting point for these reading groups. With that I have good experience with, but I know a lot of bad experiences with individual teachers who try to do an individual thing in a context that is not helpful.
Thank you, Professor Orhan, and thank you very much, Jan Harvey, for that question and that answer of Professor Orhan, that now you know how do we maximize the different, the diverse students that we have, and we're trying to implement this in our classroom. Now it's our problem is the administrator support. And I like the answer of Professor Orhan, that first when we get to know about this, then have a friend talk about this one, and maybe within your grade level, maybe try to figure it out, implement one lesson maybe or two lessons, and then talk about it informally, and have another friend, and your friend will have another friend, and then until we can inform our administrator. And that's the thing that JP Yonko is having in the chat, because it's really true that lack of support from teachers and administrators will contribute to the non-implementation of multiculturalism in our system, right? So thank you for that, JP. And that's a very good strategy. So if for example, you're the only teacher in one school who attending the session, and you know that it has a promise for our students in the classroom, then try to work on it, read some articles, and maybe if you have screenshot the sharing of Professor Orhan, we could use that in our action research literature and try to do it in our class. And then just don't give up if there's one thing that it's not really, the administrator, it's not really unsupporting on what we are doing. They just need information on what we are doing. Thank you with that. And another question here from Stefan. What would be the best way to develop and enhance the diversity learning nowadays, especially in this new mode of learning online?
Yeah. I think in order to answer that, I'm just, Shilani Rolares did a great PhD with me in Leuven on this topic. So she is the expert on this field. She developed this online environment for pre-service teachers that has been shown and peer-reviewed and published effective to increase pre-service teachers' sensitivity throughout a very interesting online course that I think can be open for many people. So I'm referring to her, and I can also put the articles again in the chat to contact her in this regard. Amy, I see another very interesting question that I would like to answer in the chat that came from Henry Zayas, and he asks, won't encouraging minority culture too much encourage tribal behavior among them? I'm curious whether there is still room for a bit of colorblind approach to encourage individualism among students. This is a very interesting and common question. So let me briefly answer on that part. I think in order to avoid what might be regarded as a tribal behavior, that we need to also, maybe I stressed that not enough, multiculturalism is not only about valorizing differences, but also the unity within the differences. So it's about to think that there is always also a shared identity where you can where all the differences can be part of. A good example would be like the beginning of let's say the national anthem that unites all the different peoples within the same shared context. So this is should be always a part of multiculturalism, this shared identities. And for instance, a shared identity can be a national identity, like the Philippine identity could be a thing there to unite, to avoid this tribal behavior. But also on a more lower level, think about a school identity, to be proud of a university identity, to be a member. So you can be a member of a minority group, but you can still be united because you are all students of University X, or you are all so. It's important, I think, and that's something I should have in the presentation, maybe more stressed more, that multiculturalism is not only about differences, it's also about the unity in differences. So but then it's important to choose the level of unity in a regard that has been accessible and acceptable for all groups. When we take a unity element that has been historically very negative towards, let's say, religious differences, then it becomes hard to use that as an element of unity. So you might be thinking what unites us in a most practical way, and at that level, some lower level of identities, city identities, school identities, and university identities might work better than large identities, but it depends on the country. For instance, we see that it works in the United States, where the American identity unites African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and this is also pronounced. These are all Americans, but they have their own racial identity, and this is unity in differences. So that when you support African Americans, you do not support tribal behavior. That there's always Americans in this. While in Europe, it does not work like that. You don't in Europe, the national identities such as Belgian French or Dutch, they're not seen as uniting. So there is this strategy seems not to working, but we can have city identities and school identities that still bring the differences together. So it's always important to keep that in mind, that diversity and unity comes together. Is there still room for colorblindness? Yes, but to a very strategic and temporally time, namely, I would say the first day of the class. That it's sometimes felt offensive that you start by just looking at the difference and see, for instance, a student that have a appearance of being a minority, that he or she gets a question about that. That could be interpreted as an offense by students or by persons who have been maybe victimized in previously on that regard. But after people make their identity clear, after when I know somebody identifies as a Muslim, as a black person, with a certain identity, then there is no need for colorblindness anymore. Because when people identify with something, then I can freely engage with that and see, oh, I see that you identify as a black person, as a Muslim, as an IP, or so then it gives me the idea to valorize it and to bring to put focus on that. Then I don't have any reason to be colorblind. But when I do not certainly know this identity, it might be better to be having a strategic colorblind perspective temporarily until the identities are clear. And if you want to start about it, you can just start talking about your own identity. For instance, I do identify as a Belgian Muslim professor, so everybody can ask questions me about these two of my identities. But it would be strange that before I identify as such, that I can get a question on that. That would be strange. So until that happens, that the identities are clear, you cannot just assume identities by physical appearance. That's something should be. So until that is not clear, I think there is a small temporal strategic case for colorblindness, but that ends after the identities are clear. After that, we should, when we know that people claiming their identity, then we can, but we shouldn't impose them. We shouldn't say, oh, you look like a person that looks like from this background, so you should, that's identity politics, and that should be avoided. But apart from that, I think there's no case for colorblindness.
Thank you very much, Professor Han.
Yeah, large answer, but I think it's an important topic to address.
Yeah. That's very clear that if everyone is very clear on their identity, and then if everyone is also open-minded, actually one deficit that you have mentioned a while ago is the fixed mindset. But if the people are open-minded, like for example, this month is the month of Ramadan, and some of the Muslims, many of them are fasting, right? So if we respect that one, when our Muslim brothers and sisters are fasting and we are inside the office and we know their identity, so therefore, if you want to eat, you have to hide somewhere in your room because they are fasting, right? And we know their identity. So that's the thing. That's one example that I could think of. There's another question, Dr. Orhan, here from Melmar, but I'm not so sure if you already answered this one. What will happen if we don't handle well diversity inside the classroom?
Yeah, I think that what, so there are harms at the short term and long term. Short term, disengagement from schools. So when people just see the school as not their territory, they will less inclined to be engaged. That's the short term effects of. But on the long term, you will have societal issues that some groups will radicalize, and I think that or both countries had issues with for instance terrorism, and many, if you look at the histories of Beckman, that this radicalization, this much comes from a stance of against the society where you're not feel welcoming, and this brings people to extremist stances. So there is this correlation, at least, between exclusion and between bringing some people to extremist ideas, which we all want to avoid. We, both the Belgian and the Philippines, had this terrible situation of attacks that we need to avoid. Yeah? So in order to also societal peace, I think it's important to have this inclusion and respect for cultural diversity. That's the long-term disadvantage. So I would rather say on the short term, you will lose some school outcomes, but on the larger effects, when this is a sort of societal thing, it can trigger societal conflicts that we want to avoid, of course, in a peaceful society. And that is, I think, the two reasons why this is so much important.
Thank you, Professor Han. And that's the thing that Professor Han challenged us during the first session, that we are challenged to make school policy that will avoid societal conflict, right? So, yeah, and with that, one of the chats here is also an answer to that question from Edna Nabwa. As a teacher, we have to make sure that all learners have the opportunity to showcase their cultural heritage, regardless of age, color, and race. Otherwise, if one group becomes the mainstream, others will feel unrepresented and withdrawn, which will eventually affect their academic performance. Thank you. And then we have here another question, Professor Orhan from YouTube, Johnson Romoso. May I ask, what is somehow the reason of color blindness, and how and what should be the best strategy to make sure that these learners will still acquire the quality of education they deserve?
Well, if I understand the question well, it asks the roots of the question of where does it come from, right? Well, it comes from actually a very good intention of the idea that equality can be brought by ignoring differences. That's actually naive, you could say, but well-intended background. That's why it's so hard to challenge, because it's well-intended. However, so that's another cause of the dominance of the colorblind idea is the idea of meritocracy, idea of that something that we tend to try to believe in it, that or individuals' efforts are more important than group membership. We want to believe in that. While this is not true, and we know that this is from research based not true, that group membership is a predictor of success in society, both in terms of socioeconomic or whatever. This is not a nice situation. This is not a nice thing to regard. So the meritocracy idea believes that it's about your individual effort. So this steers the idea of colorblindness in schools. If I understand the second part of the question well, so even if in a situation of there is colorblind type of teaching, what can be done? I think that was a question. Well, I think, of course, a quality of education is much more than only how diversity is approached. There's also just good teaching, direct instruction, high expectations, a warm but disciplinary situation at school. So high level of disciplines, but also high level of warmth and close relationship. So combining a strict discipline with love for education and love for children, that these things are necessary in all schools. So even in the case of colorblindness, you have you need this high level of educational quality by having your instruction very, very clear, by having the discipline set up, and by having very warm student-teacher relationships. These are also important in cases where you have a more colorblind perspective to guarantee high level of education. And that I would say is right.
Thank you, Professor Han, for that straight answer to that question. Another question that I've missed during my scrolling, that question is from Jenny Cosido. My question is all about religious minorities. Is there a certain schools that have interfaith house of worship or spaces for students who are religious minorities?
Well, interestingly, there's increasingly, for instance, in some countries that I've seen these silent rooms, they call it, that or interfaith rooms, and where not only religious minorities but even atheists are welcomed to just having a minute of like meditation or even or just types of mindfulness exercises can be done, so that these rooms are increasingly more existing and the challenge is, of course, how to design that in such an inclusive way that no one is excluded. For instance, one challenge is of course, in some religious beliefs you need gender separation when it's about the praying. So what I've seen is rooms where you have potentially a curtain when you need that, right? So you have to be sometimes very creative to make that places inclusive. But it's increasingly practiced in especially in the United States, that I've seen in the UK, have places where different religious people can meditate, pray, and these are even open for non-religious people who also tend to meditate and they just don't call it prayers. That's the difference. But it's basically the same. It's taking a time for spirituality, and yes, these are increasingly common.
Thank you, Professor Han. We need time to scroll on the chat, or anyone who had question and like to open their mic or raise their hand. From those who are here in a Zoom room. I will give you. Okay, there's one raise hand here from the selfie tech person.
Hello.
Yeah, yes.
There is one question from our live audience. I would like to ask this question to Professor Orhan. Is studying history important in dealing with diversity issues? And is there a definite criteria in measuring success in diverse schools?
The second part of the question, I didn't got it. I will briefly also answer the first question. Yes, of course, I think history is a very important element in this regard, because history explains muchly how we came up to a diverse situation. And the last 2 years were really turbulent in this regard in European contexts, because as Europe have a history of colonialism throughout the world, and many diversity that we have in Europe actually reflects this colonial past. It was found that in education there's no attention on it whatsoever. Just one example of it. For instance, I went to school in Belgium all my life, and during primary schools we learned about history, and we learned about that at a certain moment, Belgium had a colony in Africa, the Congo, which is like 30 times larger than what Belgium ever is, but that was a Belgian colony. But I never learned about the terrible things that happened during this colonialism period. That was not a part of the curriculum. While, of course, Belgium had a history of almost a genocide in Congo, well, with estimations of 10 million Congolese people died during this colonization period in a very terrible circumstances. This wasn't a part of our curriculum, of our history curriculum. While we have a large population of Congolese students now in Belgium who are going to schools, who have history lessons, and it's just not speaking the truth excludes them from the curriculum, excludes them from school by not representing the history in a more social justified way. Yes, terrible things happened. Yes, and we need to be aware that the results are still carried to today. this acknowledgement only started by a couple of years ago, and it's now that the curricula are paying enough attention to this terrible history of colonialism and in the European context. So again, but it is very context specific. The history of the Philippines is, of course, very different than mine. But in terms of it is very important to have a multi-perspective look at the history on and to be to make place for the histories of different groups from different perspectives if you want to grasp diversity well.
Thank you, Professor Han. I guess this is the last question from YouTube Live. The papers presented in this session clearly showed that the multicultural approach is more advantageous for learners. But does this include new gender identities prevalent in the West right now?
I'm not that expert on gender diversities and their implications as well. But one thing that I can add on this different new gender identities is that the level of educational inequality in terms of achievement is not that outspoken when we speak about these various gender and sexual identities, like in the case of cultural group identities. But I'm not. There are other problems like victimization and violence against groups. That's and there might be the answer to provide their an answer. But in terms, but I'm not an expert on it, so I'm not going too much into detail in a field that I'm not researched it well, that I'm not examined well. But certainly some theoretical perspectives could be explored in that regard as well. But I am not the expert on that field.
Thank you, Professor Han. I'll give maybe 10 seconds for those who will give the last question from the Zoom, and I will just count going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So nobody raised their hand, I guess. That's the last question, Professor Han.
Okay, I would just like to briefly add that I really hope that as the pandemic situation is now becoming better throughout the globe, and that these online sessions will be very valuable to have the ability to. I'm very thankful and grateful to be able to speak to 100 people that are listening, and even more at YouTube. That I would really love to maybe once repeat this in a physical context. So I would, when there's possible, very much hope to coming to the Philippines to be possible to do this in at least once in real life. So
yes.
I'm very much looking forward to do that in the coming year or years, whenever it's possible for you. So I'm looking for that opportunity as well in the near future.
And with that, Professor Han, we are taking note of that. So that means we could possibly invite you here in Mindanao. Beside that, I know we are part of the travel not list area, but I'm very sure you will consider that one to visit our place soon if travel restriction will allow us. Thank you with that note, Professor Han. And I guess with this, some of us here are teachers and professors and maybe pre-service students, and there are a lot of theories being presented and researchers presented by Professor Han. And those questions we have right now are good questions. And I'm very sure that some of you are thinking how these theories really work in our classroom. So we encourage you to do some steps, either small step or bigger step, depending on what you could do in our classroom. with the three sessions that we have. So with that, I'd like to remind for those who are here, the participants in this workshop, Professor Han, may I please give me time to present this to all the participants. So we are giving certificates with CPD units for those participants who have complete attendance last April 8th and also April 27th. So all of you will receive certificate of attendance. For those licensed teachers or non-licensed teachers, all of you will receive a certificate of attendance. This will be given after every session to all participants who accomplished the session evaluation. It will be posted in the chat or in the YouTube live chat. And the CPD units will be given to licensed professional teachers who completed the two sessions, April 8 and 27, accomplished the session evaluation, but you have to submit the output, the final output. So the final output could be submitted before May 7, 2022, and after that, the Capital University will going to print all your certificate with CPD evaluation. So you will going to highlight in your instructional plan the integration of concepts about diversity in education. Submit copy of your instructional plan as your final output on this webinar. We suggest, but you could do more if you want, but this is the basic that being recommended by the organizer, this template. Write your name, your school, your subject area, and what specific lesson that you could think about. What is the learning outcome, the objective, how long would you implement that? And think about the assessment task or activity. And then how are the concepts of diversity being integrated in this lesson? And when would you're most likely to implement this plan? Okay, so if you want to access this template, you could access it online using this link posted in this presentation, and I guess the organizers will also email to you this template. And certificate of participation with CPD units will be sent to you. And for those who will apply, please submit your output in this website. And the deadline of that will be on or before May 7. So therefore, you could send your outputs tonight if you wish to. Okay? So thank you very much, Professor Han, for that good discussion today. And I'd like to return the microphone to Jay. Thank you, Jay.
Once again, that was the Dean of the College of Education, MSU-IIT, Professor Dr. Amelia Tibuan. Big round of applause. Thank you, ma'am, for facilitating the Q&A and also helping the participants to get their question through our resource speaker. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we would also award the certificates to our resource speaker. So our resource speaker will be receiving 2 certificates. Let me read a citation. College of Education, Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology, and College of Education of Capital University in cooperation with the Council of Deans for Teacher Education, Region 10, and Commission in Higher Education, Region 10. Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Orhan or Dr. Orhan Agirdag for sharing his valuable time and profound expertise as research speaker in the webinar series on diversity in education held on February 16, April 8, and 27, 2022 via online platform. Signed by the Chancellor of MSU-IIT, Professor Alizidni M. Ditokalan, JD, Attorney, and of course, the President of Capital University, Attorney Casimiro B. Juarez Jr., the President of CODTE, Region 10, Dr. Crescente Exurpi Barcelona, and the Director of CHED Region 10, Dr. Freddy T. Bernal, Sasso 3. Another certificate of appreciation, certificate of, by MSU-IIT, Republic of the Philippines, Mindanao State University, Iligan Institute of Technology, College of Education, this certificate of appreciation is presented to Orhan Agirdag, PhD, from KU Leuven and University of Amsterdam, for his academic contribution as a distinguished visiting professor of said MSU-IIT from February 16 to April 27, 2022. Signed by the Dean of the College of Education, Professor Dr. Amelia Tibuan, and the Chancellor of MSU-IIT, Professor Attorney Alizidni M. D. Tocalan. Ladies and gentlemen, let us open our microphone and let our research speaker hear our resounding applause. Thank you very much. So now, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver a closing message, please help me welcome the President of CODTE Region 10, Dr. Crescente Exurpi Barcelona. A warm applause, please.
Thank you very much, sir. This webinar series explored key challenges and strategies related to addressing and teaching diversity in the school environment and to some extent promoting tolerance. As educators or as future educators for the pre-service teachers, we always aim for our students to be successful, to have the right knowledge, skills, and attitudes to find their best place in the society we lived in. Our modern society is extremely diversified as well as multicultural, and as such, promoting diversity in the classroom has become a crucial goal for teachers, school, and education as a whole. Building empathic and open-minded characters can make a real impact for learners and for the whole society. Hence, we are challenged to rethink our practices, to recreate our learning environment, and to redesign our pedagogical practices, one that advocates and celebrates differences and aims to give what is best for learning. We are eternally grateful to the person who allowed us to realize these points through his very substantial inputs, Professor Dr. Orhan Agirdag. Truly, we are honored to have listened to your insights and research from February 16, April 8, and today, April 27. What made the webinar series more meaningful is the fact that in every session, challenges are posted to all of us. And the most basic one is, what can we do with what we have learned in this session? And I think that we are in one boat in saying that challenge is accepted. The event would not have been successful without the miracle workers behind this event. And I sincerely thank the following people. First, to the Mindanao State University IIT College of Education, headed by Dr. Amelia Buwan, along with Dr. Shulani Teresa Ruales and her team, with Mr. J. Ruel Semilia, our moderator. Our salute to you for organizing and looking into the nitty-gritty of the webinar series, most especially for bringing in Dr. Orhan to our part of the world. And yes, Dr. Orhan, you are very much welcome to come to the Philippines. Second, to Capital University College of Education, headed by Dr. Ryan Glenn Narvasa, for ensuring that CPD units be granted to our attendees and for the unparalleled support given to make this event possible. Third, to the officers and members of the Council of Deans for Teacher Education Region 10, I'd like to acknowledge the officers, Dr. Ryan Glenn Narvasta from Capital University, Dr. Laila Lumibo from USTSP, Dr. Gladys Carlos from Central Mindanao University, Dr. Ami Buwan from MSU-IIT, Dr. Carmen Cotapte from New El Salvador Colleges, and the different deans of the region coming from the different teacher education institutions. We are also ably guided by our advisors, Dr. Miriam Fuentes and Ms. Rosemary Lumasag from the Commission on Higher Education Region 10, headed by Dr. Freddy Bernal. Last, we sincerely thank our participants coming from the different institutions, both faculty and pre-service teachers. I think we also have participants other than from the region. And I'm very much grateful that we have not lessened the number. We are still more than 100 from the very end until this time. And we have 100 plus more in our YouTube live. Ladies and gentlemen, to end, let me quote Mahatma Gandhi saying, "Our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization." Friends, let us all accept the challenges given to us. And together, we weave the tapestry of different colors in our teaching and learning by embracing multiculturalism in our classes. Thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone.
Once again, a big round of applause to our CODTE President of Region 10, Dr. Crescente Exorpi Barcelona. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would give you again some reminders, particularly regarding the acquisition of the CPD units. First, let me remind everyone that in answering the form, please spell your names correctly. If you want to double check your names, the spelling of your names, that is very good. Second, also write your email addresses correctly. And on the evaluation form, the deadline is until 12 midnight. So we hope that you can accomplish the evaluation form before 12 midnight or on that mark. And then our technical will be giving to you 3 links. The first link is the link to our evaluation form. The second is the link for the certificate of attendance. And the third will be the link for where you can submit the output, or we call it the submission link. And also a while back, Dr. Buwan mentioned about another link, which is where you can get or access the template for the output expected in this webinar. So we suggest that you copy the links. I think it is given in the chat box and also in our YouTube live. Once again, please copy the links. And at this point, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation to all pre-service and in-service teachers who are frequent participants of our webinars. Would also like to say big thanks for the strong support given by the CHED Region 10, the Council of Deans Region 10, headed by Dr. Crescente Exorpi Barcelona, and Capital University, represented by Dean Dr. Ryan Glenn C. Narvasa. We look forward for our future collaboration. And finally, to our resource speaker, thank you very much, Professor Agirdag. We hope to see you on your next visit here in our university, hopefully face-to-face, for possible research endeavors and engagement. This has been a very fun and insightful experience to all of us. That ends this webinar. Have a great day and keep safe, everyone. Bye. Oh, before we leave, we will have, thank you so much for the reminder. We will have photo opportunity. We would like to request everyone to open their camera for our virtual audience in the Zoom room. Wow, it's so refreshing to see beautiful faces. Okay, you are part of the success of this event. All right, in my count after 3, wear your best smile. Say diversity. Ready, 1, 2, 3, diversity. All right, and another frame. Say diversity, 1, 2, 3, diversity. And another, 1, 2, 3, diversity. All right. I think, yeah, we will end at that point because others are not anymore opening the camera. Thank you so much for your big support and your cooperation. Goodbye, everyone. See you soon.